Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Most nations at some point establish a capital city where they have as their seat of government. Other countries that have diplomatic relations with this nation generally put their embassy in the same capital city. And this is true in most places, and the one exception where it has not been true has been Israel, where the capital city is Jerusalem and most embassies have been in Tel Aviv. Now recently, in fact on May 14th, the United States physically moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And there was some controversy over this. So today I want to try to convince you that it was the right decision. And in order to do so, I want to go through a little bit of Jewish and Israeli history, then talk about congressional direction as far as what the embassy situation should be, and third, the results of the move as they've occurred so far. Well, let's look first at the history of the Jews and of Israel. It goes back a long way. 3,000 years ago, Jerusalem was first formed by King David at about 1000 BC, which was really the start of the Jewish state as we know it today. And over the next 900 years or so, nation states came and went, and Jerusalem came and went and was conquered and back again. And finally, roughly about 200 BC, the Jewish people took over Israel and actually ran their country for a couple of hundred years. Actually, it was more like a little over 100 years, before the Romans came in 63 BC and took over Israel. So during the time of Jesus, the Romans ran Israel, but Israel had its own government in the sense that a religious government existed. And any of you that know any biblical studies understand the conflict between the religious Jews and the Romans that were in charge. Finally, in 70 AD, the Romans took over, totally destroyed much of Israel, and burned down Jerusalem. And so for the next almost 1900 years after that, the Jewish people did not have a homeland. It was only when the United Nations, first in 1947, established in 1948 a country for the people of the Jewish people in Israel, carving it out of part of what was then Transjordan and Palestinian areas. This was partly a result of the Holocaust and World War II. So at that time, Israel was set up as a separate unit. And the capital of Israel was set up in two places, in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Now, the Arabs didn't really like what the UN had done, so they immediately started a war in 1948, and then there were subsequent wars in 1956, and the Six-Day War in 1967, and the Yom Kippur War in 1973, all of which Israel won. Now, at the time, back in 1948 again, by the end of 1948, Israel had established its capital totally in Jerusalem. And yet the other nations in the world chose not, for political reasons, not to move their embassies to Jerusalem and left them instead in Tel Aviv. Now Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are not that far apart. They're only about 30 miles apart. It takes maybe 45 minutes on a good day on the freeway to get between the two. So it's not that far away. But it's the principle of the thing. The embassies ought to be, you would think, in the capital city. So that's some background on the history. So not much changed in the 20th century as we move from 1948 to 1995. So what happened in 1995? Well, Congress of the United States decided they were going to create some policy here, and they established the Jerusalem Embassy Act in 1995. And this particular act said that it is the policy of the United States to have its embassy in Jerusalem. And this must be done no later than May 31st, 1999. And until it is accomplished, the State Department money for building and maintenance will be cut by 50% until such time as the embassy is established in Jerusalem. Okay, so why didn't it happen? Well, it seems there was a caveat. And the caveat said that the President of the United States could declare a waiver 6 months at a time, saying that it was in the interest of our national security that we not move the embassy. And so that's what President Clinton did next time he came up in 1995. And subsequently, Presidents Bush and Obama did the same thing, and even President Trump, the first couple of times, exercised that waiver. Now the vote by the 1995 resolution is important because it passed the House 374-37 and passed the Senate 93-5. So it was pretty solid. That it was a bipartisan thing that should have been done. Now, when President Trump started also letting it go for 6 months at a time, Congress once again weighed in, and the Senate came up with a sense of the Senate vote that reestablished its support of the 1995 law and urged the country to again move its embassy to Jerusalem. This vote was 90-0. 90-0. So finally, in December of last year, President Trump said, okay, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And so finally, on May 14th, this actually occurred. And actually, what it moved to, we didn't have to build a new building. There already was a consulate in Jerusalem. I've seen the building. It's pretty good size. All they had to do really is hang out another sign in front of the building. So as of May 14th, the consulate became the embassy. Well, there was all kinds of a hue and cry. Oh my God, there's going to be a war. We're going to have another Mideast war. We're going to stop the peace process. And here we are 3 or 4 months later, and none of that has happened. Yes, we had some issues with the Hamas people crossing from Gaza and attacking Israelis, but they were more interested in trying to destroy the Israeli state rather than where America puts diplomats. And so, I think this was the right move. It was congressionally directed, and the history of Israel, I think, justifies the move, and we're back on track with having the embassy where it ought to be, in the capital city. So we'll see what happens from here on out. I think it was the right thing to do, and I hope you agree, Mr. Toastmaster.
Carl Thormeyer. So last week we both offered to do a speech at the same time. I gave it to him, and then I get to evaluate. Carl was doing the 9th speech from our old standby with the intention to persuade. His goal, objective, was to persuade listeners to adopt his point of view and ideas or to take some action, to appeal to our interests, to use logic and emotion to support his position, and to avoid using notes, which he did all of that pretty well, especially the logic, the emotion. This speech was completely well put together. The the history and the facts that he used were spot on. They were researched, they were correct, it was in a good order. He started off with showing the tradition of how embassies used to be and how it wasn't happening here. Then he went through history, and he went through some points that opposition might have, and then he had a very short call to action, and we'll go about that in a minute. But he did follow a nice format of how he put together this speech. If you will accept it, I will give you a few suggestions, because Carl, he's been a Toastmaster for 50 years, so it's kind of nervous to give him suggestions. But, we all can learn. I would recommend the body language with Carl. He's got such great body language. You did a little shifting. Weight from right side to left side as you spoke. So I would recommend maybe keeping an eye on that and omitting that. Also, your history section, we kind of had 4 sections there. Your history sections went through the yellow light. So maybe I would shorten that up, tighten that up. I'm not sure how or what you would omit and how you would do that, but I would try to find a way so that you can focus more on the part where you talk about the opposition and what we were worried about or they were worried about. I'm being your audience. What we were worried about versus what really happened. So you could have spent a little more time on that, and I think that would have given you more power with your call to action, which was I agree that this was the right thing to do. I hope you agree too. So again, a nice strong call to action, having led up to it with more of opposition points that were maybe not unfounded, but that didn't prove to happen, or show us the benefits of how this has helped change things a little bit, and how our fears, though founded, weren't realized. The speech was fantastic. The vocal variety, his gestures, I mean, I can't say enough of how good it was, and it really prepares you for his next speech, which is to inspire us, and maybe you can use some of these points to inspire us to your point of view.